Welcome. My name's Sonia Wild-DeFries, and Corey Jennings and I will be co-facilitating the discussion, but we already met David. He's doing the tech stuff, thank God. Christine Gosney is on here, and she's going to be monitoring the chat. So please feel free to introduce yourself with your name, pronouns, where you're from. And then, of course, Bernadette Eve, thank you. So there's that. And welcome. This is, get comfortable. If you need tea, if you need something to eat, if you want to take notes. I always take notes so that I remember what questions I want to ask. You're on mute, so don't worry about making noise. That's fine. We all make noise. But yeah, so I'm Sonia, she, her. And I'm going to read this quote that we used that is kind of the inspiration for this conversation. It's by Anne Braden, who, as many of you know, was a white civil rights activist and justice warrior. She says, in a sense, the battle is and always has been a battle for the hearts and minds of white people in this country. The fight against racism is not something we're called on to help people of color with. We need to become involved as if our lives depended on it, because in truth, they do. And, you know, I think we wanted to do this because we're doing a political education series. And I'm really excited because I think we need to have more education. I don't think there's ever enough education, you know, and I don't really believe in experts, but what I love is that we have many people who are deeply involved and committed in centering anti-racism, injustice movements, and that's the work that's going to get us all free. And it was with that in mind that we invited the people who you're going to be hearing from today. Just to give you an idea how this is going to go, and when I'm done, I'm going to pass it on to Corey, who will introduce himself and then introduce the first speaker. Then we'll be listening to all four before we go on to address some of the questions in the chat. So as you're listening to folks, please feel free to put your questions in there. Also, I would love it if people put in there why you choose to be part of an anti-racist justice movement. Put in the chat. And if anybody, I'm working on a project that has photographs from the uprising this summer. And I would love to pair it with the reasons people are involved in the anti-racist justice movement. So if you do not want anything that you put in there used, please just say, don't use. All right. So then, you know, we'll be doing some discussion. We'll wrap it up with actions that people can take and a poem. And yeah, so I'm going to pass it on to Corey now and mute myself.
Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. My name is Corey. I use she, he, and they pronouns, and I've been participating in movements for economic and racial justice ever since my first protest at Occupy Oakland back in 2011. And I'm focused on creating a new whiteness for us to be proud of. And I've been thinking lately a lot about the question Sonia Renee Taylor over the summer had asked us, and it was, who were you before you were white? And the hierarchical racial structure has hurt us all, and is seen in many ways in the mental illnesses and isolations that plague the white communities too. It is crucial to center anti-racism in building a working class movement and join together in solidarity across all races. Black and Indigenous feminism has taught me that we're not going to get free until we're all free. One thing I find myself struggling with is vague words like liberation, anti-racism. They always trip me up, as in like, what does it actually look like? What does it mean? So today, I'm looking forward to taking a deep dive into what these concepts mean for folks. What does liberation mean for white folks centering anti-racism look like? What are we liberating? Where are we going? The liberation for us in this country would look unique because it would be multiracial. And to get there, we have to combat these narratives of racism and do something to repair this colonial monster we've created. So today, it is in my honor to introduce our first guest, Scott Davis. Scott Davis has been living, working, and organizing in Rio Arriba and Santa Fe County. Rio Arriba, thank you. And Santa Fe counties of New Mexico since 2007. He has worked as a project manager, rehabilitating Native housing in the region since that time. During these years, he has been educated through those close relationships in the community, in men and boys' role in the ending of violence against women and girls as well. What it means to be a white settler in Tiwa world, coupled with his role and resources as a resource trainer for a call to men, Scott has found purpose addressing white male privilege and how it can be leveraged towards justice. And I'll pass it back to Sonia to introduce our second guest. Think you're on mute still, Sonia.
I am. Scott's going to go ahead and talk, and then I'll introduce Amanda after that, if that's all right.
All right. Thank you very much, Corey. My name's Scott Davis, he, him. I'm in Tewa land, and that is, you'll find that on your map in northern New Mexico, right between Santa Fe and Taos, a little town called Chimayo. And actually, the house I'm in, the property line is in Santa Fe County, but the upper part of the property, the lower part is in Santa Fe and the upper part's in Rio Arriba. And I live and work so I live here and work in Rio Arriba at Okeawinge, which is a reservation right up the road. I'm their project manager for the housing authority. So I take all of y'all's tax money and I put new windows and roofs and bathrooms into houses on the reservation. So thank you very much, because you also pay for my truck, and I'm very happy with my truck. So I appreciate y'all. This question is really huge. And I gotta say, in anti-racist organizing, I come to it from a place of Indigenous solidarity. And that has a lot to do with where I live and how I've been brought along in this movement. The things that I have learned, there are lists of Indigenous women, Black women, trans folks who have educated me along the way, and both in person and through reading their work. And I just want to acknowledge that. Like, I don't think that anything I'm going to say here is unique or new. I'm definitely not an expert. Sonia, I hear you on that 100%. But I do have a unique experience. And I think that is what makes it important to share, is that it is unique. So one of the things in terms of, Indigenous solidarity work, when we think of white supremacy, oftentimes we're thinking of concepts and ideas and policies and how they impact people of color. What we don't always think about is that white supremacy needs a place to happen. And I just breathe into that. It needs a place to happen. And where it is happening is on stolen land. I would assume that most of us in here are either renting or paying a mortgage. And if so, then you are paying for stolen property, the right to live on stolen property. And the person you're paying is not the person who's stolen from, right? That's kind of the point of it. So in my own journey, I have seen in my community, which is minority white community, mostly Indigenous and Hispanic folks live where I live. I have seen the ravages of white supremacy and settler colonialism in person. People I love, people I consider family, even though we don't share blood. And I've seen this impact. And for a long time, that was definitely my motivation to be doing organizing work, to be speaking with men, to be speaking with white folks, to be involved in action, direct action, education, however that may be at given moments. And a lot of that has been, because I want to help my family, my community. But it's deepened from there. I can't say that that's where it stops. I think that's where it started for me. I know that's where it started for me. When I have a good friend. She was my first employer here in the Valley when I came here in 2007. And she's a Native woman who owns a construction firm. She hired me as a project manager. And I don't know, every 9 months, sometimes 6 months, I'll get a call from her. Hey, my cousin just died of an overdose. Or there was somebody dying of alcoholism, or somebody has been incarcerated. And hearing these stories over and over again, not just from her, it hurts my heart. It hurts my heart understanding the legacy of how these things have come to be. A young man I worked with who worked under me on one of my crews a year and a half ago, a block from my office on the reservation, he hung himself in a closet out of despair, a Native man. So this is really, hitting me deep. But what about me? Like, who am I in this equation? And honestly, I'm still struggling with finding exactly Scott Davis, what is it? Because the next piece that I come to is my children. My children are born into this structure of white supremacy. And one of the things that my family, my familial line, which goes back many generations on this continent, I'm by no means a newcomer to the continent. My lineage is here. We were required and are continued to require to self-mutilate in exchange for this privilege of whiteness, to take our ethnic roots and make them secondary in our identities. My Italian grandmother, she is actually the closest to our European heritage. She didn't speak her language, and she came here when she was 7 years old. I talked to my dad about this. He's gotten upset. He said, well, but we have a strong Italian heritage. We have a strong connection to our roots. And I said, other than the raviolis at Christmas, I can't really tell you what those connections are. So I think about my children. I think about who are they going to be on this land? Who are their children going to be on this land? Who are their children's children going to be on this land? This makes it very personal for me. I want my children, their grandchildren, to have a sense of community and belonging in this place that I do not have. I feel very welcome here. I feel like I belong in my community as a newcomer, but my roots are very, very shallow. Very, very shallow. And so I feel that as white folks, our role, our journey, part of what we need to do is to build a new culture of white anti-racism. And I think that is a really poor phrase to use, white anti-racism, to define what culture can be. It's a bad name for a culture, right? But we are in those beginning steps. And what could that become, where we are no longer standing at the head of the line? Instead, we're sitting together in a circle where no one of us is in front and no one of us is behind. And I want that for my kids. And I don't think my kids will experience it. Honestly, it breaks my heart, But I believe there's a chance that my great-grandchildren will experience it. And I think that it's not possible for me to see the future that I want to create, because I am creating it in community with others. I can't hold that vision by myself, because it's a vision that we hold collectively or not at all. But I can feel it. I can't see it. I can't articulate it, but I can feel it. And I just want that for my kids, my grandkids, their grandkids. So yeah, I think that's a lot of it. And one last piece, I think there is a healing for white men that, and I work with a group, Organizing White Men for Collective Liberation, OWMCL. It is the worst acronym, which makes it the best acronym. So you can find us, owmcl.org. And we have been hurting ourselves for so many generations, and we see it in health, in our health, in addiction and suicide rates. So yeah, I want healing for my community as well. Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. There's just so much that you said that I feel like is almost like a meditation, you know, and that line, no longer standing in the front of the line, but sitting in a circle together. I think it's so important that we do try to envision what it could be, and find new language for sure, white anti-racist. Yeah. So thank you so much. And in keeping with that, you know, when we first started, we were all talking about, you know, sometimes you get nervous before you speak. What I do is I forget my notes. So I want to acknowledge that here in Kentucky, we're on Iroquois, Chickasaw, Shawnee, and Yuki land. We are also obviously on stolen land. And the other thing that I meant to bring up, because it is in the front of my mind before I introduce Amanda, is that my Louisville protest family is in deep grief, because in this span of 3 weeks, we have had 2 of our leading activists murdered, Travis Najdi and Chris Smith. And, you know, I was thinking about that earlier today, and I thought, oh, God, I don't even feel like I can participate in this panel. And then I thought, no, this is our work. This is our work. And one of the things Travis was always saying was keep going, you know, and to keep going, but also acknowledge, you know, sometimes this is deeply, deeply, a lot of the times, deeply, deeply painful, you know. And Chris, who was just killed on Friday, he was someone who really encouraged open dialogue and discussion. And he had a great sense of humor in that too. And I just feel like this is a good way to honor both of them, you know. So I just wanted to bring their spirits into this space with us. And now I'm going to introduce Amanda. I love Amanda, and I'm so happy that she is here with us. So I'm going to read this. Amanda Stahl, a disability and queer activist from Kentucky, the lead organizer and director of a nonprofit organization called the Independent Seekers Project, organized and developed by people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She says, we focus on mental health education and activism. Amanda has a master's in social work and clinical practice through ISP and understands the need for mental health care, social change, and healing justice. Amanda believes that social change and social justice have to go along with healing and resilience. Amanda's work is rooted in the understanding that we must strive to realize, how we are all interconnected in order to change our little piece of the world. Amanda says, I'm so excited to be working with Showing Up for Racial Justice. I've been working on racial justice issues throughout my career, including with this great organization and the Fairness Campaign of Kentucky. In my spare time, I love playing with my nieces and nephews and can often be found at one of the many great coffee shops in Louisville. Let's hope that can happen again soon. All right, I give you Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be in this conversation. I don't know how to, what Scott said was so amazing. I don't know how to go from there, but I'll try. I guess I can tell you a little bit about my story and how I got involved in my work. And I don't think I've talked about it publicly a lot. when I identify as disabled, I use a wheelchair for those who can't see it on the video. And so when I started my activism when I was in college, and I was a social worker. I wanted to do policy work because I didn't want to work with individuals. I was like, I wanted to do organizing and policy work. But then as I was in college and I was really sad, I didn't understand my disability or my sexuality or any of that. Being disabled, it's very dehumanizing, and it can make you feel like you're not human, and that's because of ableism, but I didn't know that word back then, and I didn't know how ableism and racism kind of support each other. But I went through a lot of counseling and everything when I was in undergrad, because I was suicidal and because I didn't love myself, and I wanted to love myself. And then after I got out of college, I worked at a homeless shelter in Detroit, and I worked with all these young women, learning all these basic skills about living. I was 22, helping 18-year-olds learn about life skills. I didn't know anything about life skills at all. I don't know what I was doing. But the favorite session they loved was when we talked about meditation and we talked about taking care of our hearts and our bodies. And at that moment, I was like, I need to go into work with more one-on-one people, because I realized we can teach people all the tools, how to get a checkbook and how to do all this stuff, but if they're not healed on the inside, they won't think they deserve all this services they get, and then they will just be back where they started eventually, right? And so that is the starting point of when I started thinking about and when I was in school, I finally came out as disabled and came out as queer, but I think coming out as disabled was harder for me than coming out as queer, because that's the I can choose to, there's no hiding my disability. I can hide my queerness if I choose to do that. And so that was really, but to become out as disabled, that was like, I loved myself and I was able to come out as a sexual being at that point in my life. So, and going through therapy and things like that allowed me to love and accept all parts of myself. And the last part that I had to learn to accept was my whiteness. And I don't know if Chris remembers this, but I used to be on the board of the fairness campaign, and we went to the first, one of the first surge events in Tennessee, and it was the first time I recognized my whiteness, because it's like the privilege that I have. So of course it was the last thing that I noticed about myself, and so realizing that I have to grapple with what whiteness means and things like that. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. And so since then, I've focused on the idea of ableism, right? And racism, and how ableism has supported racism, has supported homophobia, has supported transphobia, has supported like the idea of capitalism, like that it's all supported by ableism, saying you're not valuable if you don't work, you're not valuable if your body doesn't do things in a certain way. So ableism is what holds all this stuff up. And that's the thing that blew my mind when I put it all together. I'm like, ableism and white supremacy holds this whole system up. And that's why we need to realize that it's our common interest is to understand that these things are all connected, and we must, because labeling our bodies as sick or disabled is the way they justify everything. Why they justify homophobia, why they justify the medicalization of the body. And so it's very important to realize all this, to realize this when we're going into the room, and how these things are so connected to one another. And how economics is so connected. Like if you can't work, you're not valuable in our society. And we have to redefine what work is, especially in this moment of COVID, right? And so we know now that our community and our government does not support us, even when they say go home, don't work. They're not giving us the money that we need to survive. This is what disabled people and Black and brown people have been saying forever. But it's our chance as white folks to be like, oh, this is what's really going on here. And I think that could be the little miracle of what has been going on here, showing us how these systems are all connected and how we're all interconnected together to make something different, to say we're not going to take it anymore. We know you can do something different, and we demand that something different happen. And so but going back to my story, like, that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now. I am the lead organizer of an organization in Mobile called the Independent Seekers Project. We're led by people and for people with disabilities, but we will serve anyone, and we offer mental health care to individuals and couples, and for little to no cost to them. So it's based on a sliding scale, and we do support groups for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because we don't have a lot of space. There's not a lot of spaces for disabled folks to be together and to actually share their stories of pain and suffering. And the reason that we started this organization was, this is what I wish I had when I was growing up. A place where I could go and feel accepted for all of who I am. And I didn't really feel that way until I started working outside of the disability community itself, because the disability community has been has been majority led by white straight men, and so they're not like it. It leaves all the women and women of color and all the queer people still fighting for their rights, and so that's why it's very important to have this intersectionality framework when we're doing our work, and 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 people with developmental and intellectual disabilities don't have a lot of power, and so we're in our organization we're putting them in leadership positions, and so we don't take Medicaid money or any kind of that money, because most people with developmental and intellectual disabilities rely on the government for help. And so we can't really advocate against the government if we're getting money for our programming. So everything that we do is intentional. So, and helping the people that we serve. And right now we only serve people in Lowell because we're really small. But I couldn't do this work without a lot of the people that are in this room right now. And I also work with Surge as one of their disability coordinators, access coordinators, and we have meetings once every month or once every 2 months. Our next meeting will be on December the 23rd at 8 o'clock Eastern time, and talking about building community and what our goals are going to be for the next year. And all of you guys are invited. So it's a cross disability space, but we do ask that people with disabilities get more space in that space, but everyone's invited. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else you guys want to know, but that's about it. So please, please give me questions, because I do better with questions than this talking. So, yep.
Thank you, Amanda. We're so glad you're here.
So glad to be here.
And now, now I'll introduce our third guest. KellySue Waller. KellySue Waller is a part of Southern Crossroads and the lead organizer in the Bedford County Listening Project in Shelbyville, Tennessee for the last 2 years. Prior, she was a member of the Workers' Dignity as a low-wage worker in Nashville, Tennessee, organizing with Latinx folks around justice in the workplace for low-wage workers. She grew up poor and working class all around the South, but spent her formative years in Georgia, in both big cities and small towns across the state. KellySue Waller comes into this work from grassroots and base building background that says that those most affected by a given situation have the answers and building power with those folks. And with those folks is the way we all get free. Kelly can often be found with her nose buried in fiction books featuring folks fighting the system with an eye for building a better world. Okay, Kelly, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Wonderful. I do not often enjoy having the floor be mine, but I'm really happy to be here. As an organizer, often my role is not to speak in front of people. It is to talk to other people that speak in front of people. As mentioned, I came into organizing, which I view as, building power together with other people. And the way we build that power is through building relationships. So a lot of what I do is building relationships with people. And we know that there's a lot of complicated dynamics when you're building relationships. And so a lot of the work that I do currently in the Bedford County Listening Project here in Shelbyville, Tennessee, is organizing tenants around substandard housing issues. I am part of Southern Crossroads, as mentioned before. Southern Crossroads is a group, you might have heard of Rednecks for Black Lives. And part of that movement and that work is out of Southern Crossroads, who started the project, Bedford County Listening Project. I grew up below the poverty line. I later was a single mom below the poverty line. I grew up in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods in the Deep South before moving to Tennessee. I was very aware of my whiteness from very early on. I was also very aware of my class from early on, because we were really poor. And we were very poor alongside our Black and brown neighbors. And that was sometimes complicated by the views of my family, which I won't get into here. But what we did experience is we often all worked together, and we saw ourselves often as being in the same boat. I realized later when I moved to Tennessee and I was in predominantly white areas, that was not always true. So when I was in school in Deep Georgia, I went to schools where we didn't have great books. I lived in certain parts of Columbus, Georgia. I lived in a trailer park, smack dab in the middle of a predominantly Black area. I was one of the only white kids in my school. And the school, our school books were crap. Our Boys and Girls Club was basically a shack. Our neighborhoods, there was no money invested in those neighborhoods. And growing up there and living there, I didn't really know. I was like, well, this is how we live, and this is what it's like. And I moved to Tennessee, to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I went to predominantly white schools. And we still lived in a crap apartment, but I lived in a city that I could tell the schools I were going to were being invested in. We had books and lunchrooms and people who cleaned the school and sidewalks to walk on, just like all of these things that I was like, what is the difference here? And I was like, oh, this is a predominantly white school. This is a predominantly white area. Although I was still poor, moving to a more white area meant that I had access to schools with my own books that I could check out and take home. We had to read books in the library when I was young in the school that I went to. You couldn't check them out. I guess they were either so few or they didn't trust us. We didn't get to ask those questions. I grew up with watching my mom have a debilitating illness when she lacked health care for. As I got older and I understood that a lot of the laws that are passed by tricking people into believing that that welfare is for Black and brown folks, and that we need to not give welfare to Black and brown folks. Just say it like it is. I don't have a lot of fancy words. And as I grew up and realized that those systems and the way they were built were the reason my mom didn't have health care. And so I saw a lot of self-interest early on in saying, hey, this system is being built and we're being sold this certain message of basically blaming Black and brown folks instead of the people with money and the people with power who are passing these laws and are selling us this story. Mm-hmm. And this story is, I've heard it called different things, but basically it's around whiteness. I may be poor, but at least I'm white. I may be this, but at least I'm white. And I don't say that to shame. I got lots of love for my people. And it's one of the reasons I want to see us move past this idea, because all of my family is not a bunch of racist hicks. We're lovely people who have been sold a story that is not true. And part of accepting that story is meant living in abject poverty, without care, without the things that we need. And when I was introduced into organizing for power by joining with Black and brown workers to win wage theft cases, to win back our dignity, to say, hey, we work here and we deserve the things that we work for, we deserve to be paid. there was a solidarity there that I had not experienced before, and an idea that we can win together. And I was like, I want to learn everything about that. and the Center Workers Dignity in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm wearing their shirts. Check them out. Donate to them. I think they actually have a donating drive going on right now. So all that to say, that's kind of how I came into this work. I came into this work angry. I came into this work mad about the way that class and race had affected both my family and my neighbors and the things that we lived in. What I've learned is a joy in being in solidarity with Black and brown folks, a joy in knowing that my folks will also, workers' dignity. Someone asked in the chat. A joy in realizing that like my whiteness and their whiteness does not have to define us. It does not have to be the only thing that we are. And so I started learning about base building, creating relationships with people, finding a target, who's causing these problems for us, who can we all work together to convince that, hey, these things, we not only need them, we deserve them. We have a right to them. And part of the work of the Bedford County Listening Project that's in Shelbyville, Tennessee, we started that group by just knocking doors, people that lived here, knocking doors, asking people, what do you like here? What do you not like here? This is a predominantly white town with a large immigrant population. And we have our share of problems here. The poverty, there's not good places to work. That most of the place is owned by 3 slumlords, and they will tell lies to people. Oh, the reason you have bed bugs is immigrants. Oh, the reason there's not enough places to leave is all these people moved here. They will tell people anything. And part of my work as an organizer is to say, well, do you think that's true? Part of our work as we're knocking doors is to say, who's actually benefiting from you living in slum housing? Because it's not your neighbor. Your neighbor's not benefiting from it. We're all in this together. And what I found is people already really know that. We're not telling them anything new, but we're giving them a space to say it out loud and to talk with us. I had some pictures and stuff, but now I've talked longer than I meant to anyway. But we have been pushing to bring the Uniform Residential Tenant Landlord Act to Bedford County. We're doing this in multiracial coalition. Just 2 months ago, in the middle of the campaign, we held a anti-Klan rally here, the renters group plus Shelbyville Loves, and we invited all of the people we've been working with, the city. One of our members has just won a seat on the city council. It's amazing. Yes, Amanda. Has just won a seat on the city council to help with some of the structural change. We continue to build. Because we all have a self-interest in connecting across our communities, both around race, both around religion, where we moved from, all the different communities, because we want to build a community where we're not pitted against each other for resources. I think that's it until people have questions. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll do questions after Chris talks, but that was also really powerful. You know, one of my favorite things is door knocking and really, you know, remembering to listen more than I talk. And it's such a powerful thing. And just with all of you talking so fluidly about like the personal and how it intersects with the work, and that just is so powerful. I mean, we're always telling people like your story will keep you going, why you're here. And so I want to remind people to put that in the chat as well. And I am going to introduce Chris. Let's see. All right. Chris. Me and Chris have been arrested together before. It's good to see you, Chris. Chris Hartman is the Executive Director of the Fairness Campaign, Kentucky's LGBTQ civil rights organization founded in Louisville in 1991. He's helped increase the number of Kentucky municipalities with anti-discrimination fairness ordinances from 3 to 20. Chris previously served as Congressman John Yarmouth's campaign press secretary. That's a long. He holds an MA in drama from Washington University in St. Louis. Chris currently serves on the board of the National Equality Federation and is chair of the Louisville Metro Landmarks Commission. I remember that when we were trying to get rid of Castleman. He was named the Louisville Convention and Visitors Bureau 2017 Partner of the Year and is a former Community Foundation of Louisville Alden Fellow and LGBTQ Fellow at the Rockwood Leadership Institute. He formerly toured the nation performing Shakespeare for youth and continues to improvise. And what it doesn't say here is that Chris is also a badass and tries to hug state troopers occasionally when he's getting arrested. Go for it, Chris.
Thank you, Sonia. There's no one I'd rather go to jail with more than once than Sonia, and perhaps we can talk about that in a moment. But I just love seeing so many faces of people that I already love and adore, and folks that I don't know, but I love and adore because you clearly have an interest and are invested in this work for racial justice. As an aside, I will share my screen briefly, so I don't know if I have that sharing capability, but if somebody can turn that on, I'll do that in a moment. So I am Chris. I do use he, him pronouns, and I just, you know, I came to this work with a lot of unrecognized privilege, which I think a lot of people do. I came from, as you heard in my bio, the worlds of theater and politics, both of which, let me tell you, are not dominated by people of color. If you don't know that, Black folks and people of color are not, unfortunately, huge parts of the theater world by and large, and definitely not the political world, as we know. And thank God I found the Fairness Campaign, which, you know, my heart was always into intersectional justice, but my eyes were not open to how much injustice there truly was, and what being hired at the Fairness Campaign nearly 12 years ago gave me the opportunity to do was to be in spaces with Black folks, with Latinx folks, with queer people of color, to whom I was able to listen. And I love the folks that have touched on that listening piece. There's nothing more important to just hear people's authentic stories, believe them, and then take action in whatever way you can, or whatever way I can, to try to dismantle these systems of oppression. When I was getting ready to interview for the job at the Fairness Campaign, the thing that attracted me to the organization the most, and I'll show it to you when I screen share here in a moment, was an image that I referred to as the Wheel of Oppression on the Fairness Campaign's website. It's just a circle that shows homophobia feeding into racism, feeding into classism, feeding into sexism. And it was such an aha moment. It was so simple, and yet it encapsulated everything that I didn't know that I believed up to that point, which is that, of course, all of it perpetuates the rest of it. That racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, all of the isms, ableism, that as long as one of them persists, none of them is ever going to desist. And that's what I loved about the Fairness Campaign's approach to this work. The organization, though a queer rights organization, was always already steeped in a radical anti-racist organizing as a predominantly white organization through the years. And as I came to be part of national coalitions of statewide queer rights groups all across the US, I came to understand that that's not the standard. That's not the norm. Many organizations are still struggling, especially with board leadership, to have an anti-racist lens and a racial justice focus of their work. Now that is becoming less and less so, thankfully, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, the Breonna Taylor murder, and sadly too many murders to list here. So I am going to share my screen because Sonia suggested maybe we find maybe some poetry or something. I'm not a big poem person, but I'm a big Sonia person. And so I went on a poetry finding mission and found something that I really think encapsulates what I started hearing from the first years that I was at Fairness from queer folks of color. I think folks can see my screen now. First, here's the wheel of oppression that I mentioned. So simple. Just make the connections, and the connections are so obvious. So I'm going to flip to this poem. I believe that I can play it in the voice of the author, but I also wanted the words up here so that folks can read it as well.
Rana, reading the night.
Can you all hear this? No, you couldn't hear what I was playing. So maybe I have to actually just let you hear it on the speaker here.
This is Amal Rana, reading The Night Poetry Danced With Us for The Quarry, a social justice poetry database at Split This Rock. The night poetry danced with us. Orlando 49, emblazoned on the back of a t-shirt, worn by a white queer, who looked through and past our table of Latinx, Indigenous, Black Muslim queers, right in front of her, as if we never existed, as if we were not sitting there, laughing and thriving, radiating life, insistent in our brown, Black, mixed skin existence, as if we were not the brilliance of the sun streaking fire when it decides to go down on the horizon, as if you are not our queer siblings, familia, yars, dildars, our amors, our pyars, our everything, shaking beautiful bronzed hips. The night poetry danced with us before being shot. The night poetry danced with us before being assumed to be a shooter. The night poetry danced with us before it became second nature to check for exits. The night poetry danced with us before bullets replaced stanzas, before the breath of our beloveds became a line break with too much finality. The night poetry danced with us before we understood sound only that were gone. The night poetry danced until we realized we were the poem.
So I shared this. Everybody can go on mute. I think we're getting a little feedback there. The invisibility that I hear from so many Black queer folks and queer folks of color, Black trans members of our community who do not feel, like Amanda was talking about, being able to bring all of yourself to the table and all of yourself to the work. That so much of my work in the early years at Fairness before we became statewide was about addressing problems of overt racism within our own white queer community. And I think anybody who is a part of any intersectional community knows that some doors can really be shut to some parts of your identity. And the work I've done at Fairness, I've not been prouder of the work that I've done that has made me very unpopular with a broad cross-section of our white constituency. My most cherished and prized emails are the ones with white gay men unleashing a tirade of anger and not understanding why we would prioritize racial justice and not just focus on queer rights, because obviously they are the same. working on one of them works on the other. But what's at the root of all of it in our country truly is the racism. And so I'm excited to sort of field questions and to hear the work that you all are doing, because I am still not doing enough. And am always looking for the ways that we can deepen and broaden in meaningful ways our work for racial justice in our white community and in our white queer community. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really, really appreciate that. And beautiful poem. And just thank you again for all of you for bringing so much of yourselves to this discussion. Christine is gonna look and see if you all have questions. And I also just wanted to remind folks, if you haven't introduced yourself and why you want to be part of the anti-racist justice movement. You know, Corey and I were talking about it earlier, and I think there are so many things, and it develops over time. And I feel like I'm constantly learning from the people I'm in the work with, you know, and at my core is my grandmother who raised me, who was a disabled working class woman, who was disabled because she couldn't afford the health care she needed, and, you know, had a fall, and so walked for the rest of her life with a leg that was like that much shorter than the other, and it caused all kinds of problems. But she taught me about solidarity. She taught me about all of the interconnectedness, intersectionality, really, you know. And she was someone who, she was Dutch, so she was part of the resistance there, and hiding people and taking those risks. And I guess with the way things are in Louisville right now, I've thought of her quite a bit. So I want to ask Christine, Corey, if you have anything to add, or Christine, if you can tell us if there are questions already.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Sonia. There was a question shared about how LSurge works with communities and organizations led by Black and Brown people. So if you could talk a little about what those relationships look like and how that guides the work.
Okay. Are you addressing that to me as an LSurge person, or?
Yeah, if you would, Sonia. Thank you.
Sorry, I was confused there. Well, we have what we call accountability partners who, you know, it's Black, Brown, Indigenous-led groups that we ally with in our vision for justice. So, for instance, we wouldn't ally necessarily with a group that was all about capitalism, right? And we check in and we work on projects, you know, with them, or support different projects, but we're not waiting around. And I think this is important. We're not like waiting for people to tell us what to do. We're figuring out, because our work is to break the silence in our white communities. That is the focus of our work. So, and if any, I mean, there are a couple more LSurge people on the panel if anybody wants to chime in and add to that.
Yeah, I'll add that just to name some of these groups so that people are aware. They include groups Black Lives Matter Louisville, the Bail Project Louisville, the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, as well as La Casita Center, Mi Gente, and in addition to, you know, those relationship building, that's an ongoing work, of course. LSurge also moves over half of all funds raised to the two groups that I just mentioned throughout the year. So we participate in solidarity fundraising as well. There's a question for Amanda. Amanda, how does your organization help others? And do you have support groups or intervention processes for those who need help?
How So we work with people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And for those who don't know, many adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities go to what we call like day programs. So there's hundreds of day programs across Kentucky and across local that these adults with developmental and intellectual go to. They have like job training groups. It's pretty much adult daycare for them to go there throughout the day. And our group goes into these programs and we do group counseling with them so they learn about and they can be safe and be with other disabled people and talk about their emotions about being in these type of institutions. And then we also teach them advocacy skills to learn about, the government and different kind of education around race and other types of conversations. So right now, before the pandemic, we had 4 support groups in Mobile going on, which we helped about 40 people a week. But now they're all done by Zoom, and a lot of our participants have been stuck in their residential homes for 9 months. And so we actually had to go to the court and advocate for people to be able to get teletherapy and other services because they're not able to be out in the community because of the pandemic. So, and we also had a support group. We were doing it that's open to the public, but not right now during the pandemic. But we will again, and that happens at Bridgehaven, and it's a cross disability group, and it's open to anyone that wants to go to it. So we focus on mental health for part of the group, and the other part of the group is all about popular education and learning about, different movements and how does the government work and things like that. In which we are going to do more advocacy work down the road. We just have to grow as an organization. So that's, and all our programs are either a sliding scale or free, depending on what people need. And you don't necessarily have to identify as disabled to be a part of the program. There are some groups that are closed to make people feel safe in those groups to have confidentiality. So that, yeah. I wasn't very clear about what we were doing, but we've been around for about 5 years now, and we've supported. We're growing all the time. So if anyone's interested, you can go to our website. It's independenceseekersproject.org. So, and I can't type, or I would type that in the chat. So if someone could type that in the chat, that would be great. So yeah, yep. And we're hoping to support because I'm a disabled and queer therapist. So our goal is to support other queer and disabled therapists from they can actually have queer and disabled therapists be their therapist is really helpful. So
Thank you, Amanda.
sorry, I talked a lot.
No, that was perfect. There was one question that was sent directly to me. that is for any of the panelists or presenters who'd like to share. The question is, sorry about that. The question is, what are your thoughts for how those with marginalized identities navigate this process of creating an anti-racist white culture while existing outside / or being unwelcomed in that culture?
Can you repeat that, Christine? I'm not sure I caught it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts for those with marginalized identities who are trying to navigate this process of creating an anti-racist white culture while they're also existing outside that because of the marginalized identity that they have or unwelcomed in the culture? And if the person who posed that question would like to add anything more in the chat, or feel free to take yourself off mute if you would like to add more or clarify.
So something I'm interested in is the rejection piece. I mean, obviously, being queer, we queer folks have been rejected by virtually every culture in some form or fashion throughout the years. But my whiteness gives me an instant ticket into most white spaces, and as I think other white folks, probably share that, and even so, it's sort of like white folks that need to get past my queerness before they can hear me talk about racial justice. But I guess I've had a little bit more success doing that of late. But, I use anytime I can the privilege that gets me in a door to get my foot in the door and start talking about racial justice. I do a lot of queer sort of 101 trainings for all sorts of organizations and companies. And I don't believe any of them expect me to talk about racial justice. And most of the groups, because they're all corporate environments, they all look like me. So it's a room full of 80 to 90 to 98% white folks who are there to hear presentation about queer stuff, and I'm starting to talk about racial justice. And so finding those opportunities is what I've tried to do. But I'd like to hear a little bit more explanation about sort of the marginalized identities and the rejection, or hear from other folks.
Anybody else on the panel want to address that?
I think, like Chris said, like for ISP and our work, we kind of it's kind of understood that we're gonna talk about race, but my education and my whiteness is what even gets me in the door to talk about race when we start these kind of support groups, when we're starting the support groups. But like Chris said, but it's more about using accessible language when we get in these spaces to talk to people about race and things like that. I think it's really important. And, yeah.
Great. I see that we're kind of running out of time, and I know Corey has a question too. So Corey, you want to go ahead and do that before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, maybe just like a little 3 minutes each from the panelist or something. Be kind of cool. It's a series of questions, so just whatever you interpret from it would be great to hear back. So what barriers have you ran into in your organizing, and how have you overcome them? What strategies have you found helpful in getting more white folks involved and organized? What advice do you have for folks wanting to get involved but feel overwhelmed and isolated? And what do you see as importance for focus on in the next coming year? Thanks. Would anybody like to touch on that? Scott?
Yeah.
You want to go?
Sure.
Thanks. Cool.
I wish I could give you a really clear answer and say, here's the formula and here's what works. I think that the best I can do, though, is to tell you barriers are ongoing. And I find I have the best connection to others, whether it be other white people or doing solidarity work with Indigenous folks, Black folks, in the queer community, wherever that is, when I just come from my heart and willing to learn. When I'm working with men, like through a call to men, listening to where men are at and meeting folks where they're at with an open heart, it does magic. It just opens up doors. And so, and I bring that also to organizing white folks, organizing in multiracial groups. Show up full-hearted, ready to learn, ready to listen, ready to know that you don't know. Yeah. I wish I had a better recipe, but you know, I think it's heartfelt and humility.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. There's no one way, so thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other panelists?
KellySue, she, her. One of the things that I ran into when I started getting into, like, moved from the work that I was doing around like my own work situations and moved into more white anti-racist spaces. Like we said, we haven't found a better word for that. I found that sometimes not knowing the lingo and not knowing the words, and sometimes some of the, I'm just gonna say, some of the shaming that went on in those rooms, what were alienating, and some of the ways people talked made me feel like maybe someone who was or didn't belong in those rooms or hadn't had the same level of education. So definitely experienced that. I was allowed in those rooms, and I can get in a lot of rooms regardless till I open my mouth. So I agree with Chris around that. I can get into a lot of spaces where people are like, who let her in once I start talking? But that was a barrier. As far as the organizing here, I really agree with Scott. Like, it's also around the shaming. Like when we're knocking doors and we're meeting people, this is a very red area. It's a very rural area. I'm not gonna get anywhere when people enter the door and they say things I don't like or I haven't heard, or we're out with people and my immediate response is to tell them that they're terrible and they voted wrong and they vote in not in their interest. When sometimes it's hard to tell which one of those folks up there would be in our interest. I mean, obviously there's some clear evil folks. We all know what that, but sometimes it's hard. So I would agree also, like moving in trust, listening deeply and trying to find things that we connect around and trying to point to who's actually causing the problem. Thanks.
I would say, like for ISP's work, our group has been asked to leave these day programs because our participants end up advocating too much, and that's when I know we've done our job. But that is like the hardest part of the work, is to know, like, if you do push, the people that gave you the opportunity might kick you out of the room, like everyone said. But you gotta just keep going, because there's plenty of, and one of our values at ISP is that we love each other, and that's where we start, is love. So, yeah.
I'll share very briefly. I just try to come into every situation with love and compassion and understanding, and I tried my best in all my work with fairness to give people multiple opportunities to do the right thing, to make a different choice. until it's clear that there are no chances left. Because I believe in the inherent good in most people, and that you can find that connection. And this is what I heard from all of the elders in the fairness movement coming in about how they passed the LGBTQ rights law in Louisville, was about finding a connection with someone and seeking the humanity in the other. And once you sort of get on that human plane, that level of connection, find something, that is where you can start having authentic communication and dialogue around some of these issues. And some people are never going to come along. You know, I talked about some of the emails I've gotten. Some of them have resolved in, you know, an amicable way and some more understanding, and some of them haven't. And you just got to let some of those folks go. I say, I may read the comments, but I never reply to the comments. And I really only skim them. And I would encourage others to do that as well. The getting our blood pressure up and fighting with folks. We have a booth at the state fair and everybody's worried, you know, what happens when the haters come by? I say, let them keep walking, because if you spend 5 minutes with somebody who doesn't agree with you and they are adamant about it and they want to fight about it, you've let 10 people walk by that you could have had a conversation with, who was going to be supportive or wanted more information or could be affirming. So you got to let some folks go too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So much of what you all are saying, the finding connection, trust, keeping an open heart. It's like that's part of our work also, is trying to come from that place, which is some pretty deep work in the context that we're talking about. But I do believe in that approach. And we always try to do that in our door knocking, you know, and when someone gets rattled, we just tell them to like, just take a minute. Get back into that space if you can. But we are coming to the end of our time together. And just really briefly, I want to see if anybody has any last things that they want to share or any action steps. I know there's going to be some in the chat, but if each person could maybe just take a minute to share any last things that you've thought of. And any action steps.
Legislature's coming up in Kentucky. Everything's on the chopping block. You got to be paying attention, stay connected to these orgs, LSURG, Fairness, KFTC, ACLU of Kentucky. There's going to be probably a bad version of Breonna's law that they're going to float as a good version. You know, there's probably going to be Representative Attica Scott's Breonna's law, and there's probably going to be Senate President Robert Stiver's Breonna law, and they will not be the same bill. And one of them is more likely to gain traction. So you got to stay vigilant, make those phone calls to the state legislature and take the action that ACLU, Urban League, LSURG, and others are posting. And us too. We will share that on our social media.
Our Surge is the voting meeting. It's going to be on December 23rd at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. It's going to be on Zoom. So if anyone wants more information, they can contact me and at Amanda at SR. I don't know what my Surge email address is, but I can give it to someone, give you guys my information, and we can send you out the link if you want it. So, and if anyone wants any information about anything that we're doing with ISP, you can contact us through our website at independentchurch.org.
Thank you. Scott and KellySue.
Hey, KellySue. Our big thing right now is, as we know, we're in an eviction crisis all over the country. This town has been hit really hard. It was already a housing crisis here. And one of the big asks that I'm pretty sure is going to come out from Homes for All, you can find them in a simple search, tenant Black and brown led, large, nationwide tenant organizing group, and also Homes Guarantee. Pretty soon, be on the lookout to be asked to start pressuring this upcoming administration and the CDC to extend the CDC moratorium. It's the least tiniest thing they can do immediately to stop the evictions that are gonna start basically January 1st as soon as those forms run out. The other thing more locally, if y'all got it, there's a link I shared to a fundraiser. We are raising eviction funds for people who, for mostly racist reasons, will not qualify for some of the local aid that's being given out by organizations. We've been raising money and prioritizing people who do not qualify for the federal housing assistance that's limited anyway. And also, I dropped a link to Southern Crossroads. You can sign up to stay on our regional orgs mailing list. Thanks, y'all.
Great. Thank
Well, hey, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here. I know Josh Schott is one of the co-founders of OWMCL, and he wasn't able to be here, so I kind of filled in at the last minute. And it's been really a pleasure to spend time with you. So one of the things when I'm listening to the other panelists, there are a lot of actions that people can take, and you've been given a bunch right here, right now. So I encourage everyone to do that. And in addition to that, I'm dropping a link in the chat there to a toolkit that we put together a couple of years ago about Indigenous solidarity. Because part of the work is how we take action, and part of the work is how we transform who we are and how we move across this land. Because our mannerisms have been informed by and educated by and steeped in white supremacy. Learning new mannerisms is part of the work that we as white folks got to do. So I ask you that while you're taking these actions that Chris and Amanda and Kelly have put forth, also learn about where you live, where you're at, and what you can do to support the Indigenous people in your region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, and also thank Bernadette Eve for the ASL. I feel like we could probably go on for another hour, but our time has come to an end. I want to end with a poem by Assata Shakur, who is part of the Black liberation struggle, but was captured and locked up, forced to give birth to her daughter in 4-point restraints, and then escaped in an amazing collaboration of white and Black comrades, which I don't have time to go into now. But in these times, knowing what she has endured, I want to read this poem. And she is living still in Cuba. Thank goodness they have committed to protect her. Affirmation. I believe in living. I believe in the spectrum of beta days and gamma people. I believe in sunshine, in windmills and waterfalls, tricycles and rocking chairs. I believe that seeds grow into sprouts and sprouts grow into trees. I believe in the magic of the hands, the wisdom of the eyes. I believe in rain and tears and in the blood of infinity. I believe in life. And I have seen the death parade march through the torso of the earth, sculpting mud bodies in its path. I have seen the destruction of the daylight and seen bloodthirsty maggots prayed to and saluted. I have seen the kind become the blind and the blind become the bind in one easy lesson. I have walked on cut glass. I have eaten crow and blunder bread and breathed the stench of indifference. I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy. And if I know anything at all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more. It can be broken down. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and in the fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship steered by tired, seasick sailors can still be guided home to port. Thank you all so much. Let's keep doing this work so we can all get free. Thank you so much, everybody.
You can unmute and say bye if you want.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ice cream.
Thanks.
Ice cream.
Bye.
Healthy.
Good night, all. Thank
night.
you.
Good night.